¿Cómo están, hermanos y hermanas? Today I'm going to talk about the book of Genesis. As we all know, that's the first book in the Bible, and it tells us the story of creation. It's the book of beginnings, but it tells us more beginnings than only one. The book of Genesis tells us many things, but it doesn't give us all the details that we wish it did. It does not tell us where God comes from, neither does it tell us where evil comes from. The first statement that we read is, "In the beginning, God." And just like that, there he is. Evil, likewise, just shows up in the third chapter, and we are never told where it comes from. We simply must pay close attention to what the book does tell us, because that is what is important for us to know. I want to talk about some of the beginnings that the book of Genesis talks about. The first one, of course, is the creation of the world. What is so often focused on is the 6 days of creation, and that is understandable. But I would like us to focus on the Creator instead of the creation. The way the story is told has many similarities with other creation stories that were written before Genesis was written. However, the differences between those stories and what we have in the book of Genesis tells us a great deal about how the writer of Genesis understood God, humans, and their relationship together. In all the other creation stories, there are many gods that fight, and their dead bodies are what forms the world. Humans are a byproduct of the creation. And their task is to feed the gods, give them the food they need, give offerings in the temple, and that becomes the food for the gods. In Genesis, God creates by speaking, and there's no fighting. Creation is formed in an orderly way. Humans come as the last act of creation in chapter 1. They are the climax and not a byproduct, but are created for a purpose. They are created in the image of God. I understand this to mean that humans' purpose is to represent God in this world, much like ambassadors speak for their countries. In chapter 2, the man and the woman are created to be in a relationship to God and each other. The creation story that we find in chapter 2 makes us think of a temple. A temple is where people would go to spend time with God. And we find that God had a very intimate relationship with this couple in the garden that he created for them. Because images of God are placed in temples, the man and the woman, as the image of God, are placed in this garden temple. Isaiah 66 verse 1 says, "Thus says the Lord, heaven is my throne, and the earth is my footstool. What is the house that you would build for me, and what is my resting place?" Again, we find that humans have been given a very high calling. They were made for relationship and representation of God in this world as priests. By the 3rd chapter in the book of Genesis, we find that things have gone very wrong. An evil being has entered the world in the form of a talking snake and told the man and the woman that they can be just like God. All they have to do is eat the fruit that God said not to. Eating the fruit causes many problems. The humans are driven out of the garden from God's presence, and being driven from God's presence brings death. All of the descendants of the first humans die except for one, Enoch. We find the reference to that in 5 verse 21. This shows us two things. Rebellion leads to death, but because Enoch was taken by God instead of dying, there is hope that life might prevail. The story of the great flood and a new beginning happens in chapters 6 to 9. The problem is that the new beginning has not changed things, because when left to their own fate, humans lean towards rebellion away from God. Their desire is to be like God. This is seen in the story of the Tower of Babel. The people want to build a tower that will reach up to the heavens. The goal is not to make a path to find God and serve Him, but to make a path to heaven and bring God down to them. They want to make their name great and not God's, as we read in chapter 9, verse 4. What is God's answers to these problems that have arisen in the world from a world in rebellion? This is what we will talk about in the next session. Dios les bendiga.